Mr. G. Edward Griffin, it is such an honor to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, while you're a man of many, many different areas of wisdom, everything from the communism, the threat of communism, to cancer, the medical industrial complex, the one of the main ways that I came across your work was the book, which I'll pull up here for folks, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which was my first interaction with really understanding the Federal Reserve. And I think that myself, like a lot of Americans, I always looked down at our dollar bills and thought, oh, this is from the government. It's federal. It's the Federal Reserve. It's the government, prints this money and it gives it to us to use, and that's part of its role as a government. But to understand that the Federal Reserve was not, in fact, a government organization, it's about as Federal Express, as I've heard many people say, was mind blowing to me. And so, in today's discussion, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Federal Reserve and your perspective on it, but then get into its role in today's world and the inflation, the fact that we've been printing trillions and trillions of dollars in the last couple of years, and where you think that's headed. So I guess I'll just hand it over to you and lead with the first question of, can you just give this basic explanation for people of what the Federal Reserve actually is and whose money it is? What's behind this?
Yes, well, that's undoubtedly the correct place to begin because you're quite right. Everybody, including myself in the beginning, had a totally erroneous view of what the Federal Reserve was. I was very young at the time. I was just divesting myself from my corporate job. I was, prior to that, trying to climb the corporate ladder and trying to make myself, part of the system and be successful. And I'm like most young people. I had no idea about history. I came through the public school system. I hated books because it took too long to get to the meat of the matter. I was in a hurry and so forth. Well, so I was trying to I finally came to a realization that the world was not at all anything that I thought it was, especially the more important the issue, the more likely it was, the more certain it was that it was probably presented to me as deceit. I had a false impression about it. And once I discovered when that first crack appeared in the egg, of course, the next crack was much easier. And the first thing you know, I was in a cascade of finding more cracks in the egg. And I found out the egg was pretty rotten on the inside. And so I decided to divest myself of this corporate mythology that I was pursuing. And even that was something that I didn't realize what it was at the time. It was sort of a trap. And had I stayed with it as a young guy trying to climb that ladder, I probably would be dead long ago. I worked for a large insurance company, and my job was to install group insurance programs for corporations. So I was dealing with corporate executives for the most part, and we'd have to take these chaps out for lunch and buy them a martini or so. And I thought it was a cool lifestyle because you get to go to expensive restaurants and charge it off to the company and all that sort of thing and meet some interesting and powerful people. But I look back on it now, and everybody else in that whole operation was an alcoholic, and I could say I was pretty much on the way to it. So anyway, that's a little background. I couldn't help but think about it as I started unbox all of these memories. So I decided finally I would break out of that and go and become a crusader. My crusader gene started to vibrate. And so at that time, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I wasn't trained to do much of anything in this field because I was just beginning to learn about things. But I thought, well, I went to school at the University of Michigan. And even prior to that, I was in the entertainment field. I worked for one of the first big television companies, broadcasting stations, WWJ TV in Detroit. And prior to that, if you want to go back further, I was a snotty little child actor and So that was my background. I thought, well, okay, now I'm in the real world, and what can I do? Well, I'm learning about all these red pills that we call them now. At the time, that word wasn't in our vocabulary. So I thought, well, I can produce maybe some very low budget documentary films. Had some training in communications and filmmaking and television and so forth. So I thought, I'll do that. And that's how I started. In those days, I couldn't afford a real 16 millimeter camera or setup and everything to do it like we do it today so easily and so cheaply. So in those days, we had what was called film strips. It was a series of 35 millimeter pictures, and it would go up on the screen, and the operator at the projector is sitting there with his hand on the knob, and the soundtrack is usually playing on like a disc, an old-fashioned disc, and so it goes beep, and that's the sign to advance the film to the next screen. Sorry about the phone in the background. We'll just let it go, I guess. So anyway, so I decided to do a film strip on inflation. Okay, I didn't know much about inflation except it was bad, and I didn't know really what caused it. And I had not much information about the Federal Reserve System, but I thought it might have something to do with that. So I decided I was going to do a film on inflation. Well, that was a good and a somewhat bad choice. It was good because it launched me in a direction that I have benefited from tremendously. And I think when I say benefited, I mean I have great satisfaction in knowing that I have benefited a lot of other people to understand a very important aspect of our daily lives. And that makes me feel very good. But I really didn't have much knowledge at the time. So when I got into it, of course, when I started to go to the library, and internet was not in existence, so you had to do all your research in the library. And I started looking around in the bookshelves, and I found out that there's something called the Federal Reserve System. I'd heard about it, and it had to do with money supply and demand and quantities and balances and all these things. And so I started reading books and collecting books and reading magazine articles and listening to sound recordings and all these things. And I got overwhelmed. I thought, holy moly, this is way too complicated for little old me. Well, why don't I do something that's more my size? So I kind of abandoned it. I thought this would be a lifetime project to get me up to speed so that I could even pretend to produce a film on it. So I collected a couple of banker boxes full of books and reports and things, and I put it in the back of my closet. And I don't know, maybe this is too much of the detail, but I'm sort of stream of conscious now talking how it happened. Anyway, to make a very long story short, I had occasion, I was being called to give some speeches later on because that's one thing I could do. I learned how to do that in school. So I was giving little presentations before Kiwanis clubs and PTA meetings and so forth, things like that. And I had an occasion to speak before a group in Pasadena once, and they wanted me to talk on taxes. So I decided I would talk on a hidden tax, which of course is inflation. By this time, I had a pretty good idea that was a tax and that the loss of purchasing power that the average consumer experienced wasn't just lost into the dirt or into the clouds. It went somewhere. Our lost purchasing power went to somebody, and I found out it went to the banks and to the bankers and to their partners in the government. It went to the politicians, went to the government, and to the banking cartel. And so I gave a speech on that, and it was very well received. And I'll try and wrap this up now. So I went on the road with that speech and gave for about a year and a half or 2 years almost. I talked to groups everywhere I could I gave a one-day seminar called The Crash Course on Money. And it was very well received. And then one day, a little lady at the end of one of my speeches came up to me and she said, well, Mr. Griffin, my husband passed away recently, and I have a small inheritance, but I don't want to waste it. And I don't know what to do with it in view of what you just said. Should I get out of debt? I was thinking about borrowing money so I could buy an apartment building, small one, and have an income. But maybe you suggested that being in debt was a bad idea. And what about gold and silver? Should I invest in that? And I realized during that brief conversation that I was pretty much a fraud because I had offered myself as an expert. Well, I was a semi-expert by this time on the banking fraud and how money was created and how it affected inflation. But this lady's question was beyond me. I had no idea how to answer her question. I had no idea about the real world of investments, what's good and what's bad. So I stopped putting on the seminars and I enrolled in what's called the College for Financial Planning. It was sort of like a CPA course, except for financial planners. So I went through that. I got my CPF designation, and not because I wanted to become a financial planner, but because I wanted to understand the real markets. So I came out of that process. I graduated. I got my diploma on the wall someplace, and not here. Maybe it's in the drawer, but I'm a big financial planner, but not really. But anyway, I graduated from the course. The reason I mentioned it is because when I came out of that, I was shocked. I realized that everything that they were teaching financial planners was based on a shallow or wrong understanding of the money supply. And if you believed what they were teaching me or trying to teach me, you could not give good financial advice to anybody. You might give financial advice that's profitable to you, the advisor, because you get commissions on all of these investments that you make, most of them. Sometimes there are non-commission arrangements, but most of them are commissionable. And that's why everybody wants to be a financial planner, because they can make money, and according to them, they make money while they're helping their client make money. Turns out that the client makes money only in times of expansion, but the client loses money in times of compression of the money supply. And they never think about or never talk about that thing. So it was a bad model. And I thought somebody ought to write a book about this. All right, that finally leads me to your question, which is how did I get involved in all this? So I decided I will write the book. And that was another bad and fortunate decision, because I still wasn't qualified to write a book on money and banking. I was learning about it every step of the way, becoming more indignant, more horrified, and more resolved that somebody's got to tackle this monster, this Federal Reserve System, and because it's destroying America. And so I started to write. Now I was in the beginning of a 7-year project to get all this written down, and it was still way beyond me. In fact, I don't know how I ever got through it. I was the last person in the world to write such a book. But I stopped a couple of points during that process. I said, this is too much for me. I've got these boxes full of information. I'll never get it all into a book. Well, as it turned out, it still filled up 600 pages. But at that point, I realized I was only about halfway through the story. And I thought, well, I guess if anybody's reading this book, if they ever read this bloody book, if they don't get the message by now, another 600 pages is not going to do it. So I decided to just stop it there. And so the most recent history of the Fed is not, well, I added some of it later, but the really heavy load of the history, the background and so forth, sort of stops before World War before World War II, goes through World War I. And of course, that's enough. You get the picture real clear. World War I was completely a war of the bankers, and I didn't know that before. So anyway, I published the book. And to my amazement, people wanted to read it. And all of a sudden, guys like you say, well, let's have me on their program. And they're asking me questions, and people think I know everything. Well, I know some things. I know a lot of things, enough to bluff my way through the issue of banking and currency, because that's just a part of the whole story. But now people want to know what's going on in the real world. What should we be doing now? And again, I'm coming to the position where I say, well, I'm not really sure, but I do have some fundamentals behind me now. So I understand that you want to talk about what should we do in the future. And I feel like I'm talking to that little old lady that's saying, well, Mr. Griffin, what's my investment supposed to be? I feel inadequate in dealing with that question. but I do have some opinions. And so if you're interested in my opinions, I'm ready to go.
I would love to hear your opinions, and especially just your assessment of where this system is at right now. Like, can the money printing continue indefinitely? What happens?
Oh,
This. So I'll hand it back over to you.
sure. That's really a critical question for today. You can skip a lot of history if you can understand what has evolved in a sort of short understanding. You don't have to know the details to get the picture of where we are today and the precipice at which we are now standing. So let me try and cover that as best I can. The banking system, as I saw it, evolved. First of all, the Federal Reserve was put together in 1913. It was passed into law. The propaganda for building it started in 1910. And so that was really the beginning of central banking in America, but it had already existed in Europe. And actually, the Federal Reserve was pretty closely modeled after the Bank of England. And as one of the most interesting parts of my research is that when the people who created the Federal Reserve, the bankers who created it, they went to Jekyll Island, which is the reason for the title of my book. Jekyll Island is a real island. It's off the coast of Georgia. And in those days, it was owned by the most wealthy bankers and industrialists in the United States. It was a resort island. They have a beautiful clubhouse there. It's still there. And people can go and have a nice dinner there. And I've been there a couple of times. I've slept in the hotel there. Very elegant for the era and all that. And so they went there because they wanted to create the Federal Reserve in secret so that nobody would know what they were doing. Because this was going to be a bill that was going to be offered to the American people as a way of controlling the big bad bankers. Americans were concerned way back in 1900s, early 1900s, about the problems in the banking industry, the fact that people were losing their investments. Banks were going belly up. They were going bankrupt. They promised people that they would guard their money with all intensity that they could, but they were very careless with what they did with other people's money. They lied to investors. They said, we'll make this a demand deposit. It's your money, they said. Anytime you want, you can come in and demand it, and we've got it. We'll give it back to you. We're just guarding it. That's all we're doing. But they lied because they weren't just guarding it. They were turning it around, and they were investing it and keeping the interest on themselves. But worse than that, they were multiplying it. If you gave them $1,000, they would then turn around and loan $9,000 based on $1,000 that they had, ratio of about 9 to 1 at a 10 times expansion of the money supply. Every time you gave them $1, they could loan $9 at interest. And the money was created out of nothing. And if you can run a business where you can collect interest on nothing, that's a pretty good business. Now you're beginning to understand the banking business once you understand this thing called fractional reserve banking. It's accepted everywhere in the world. They teach it in schools as being the proper banking system. That's how we do it. And they don't tell the students that it's complete fraud, that is plunder, legalized plunder of the American people. And hence we have this idea of a hidden tax. So anyway, I had to write this book, and I don't know where I left it off, but I just try and run it to the edge to where we are today. It started off that way, and their primary interest, as I saw it in the very beginning, was just how to fleece the public, how to make as much money as possible with no risk, because with the passage of the Federal Reserve System, they passed along the risk to the taxpayers. They made everybody think it was government money, and if the banks were going bad, if they made bad loans, or there was theft inside the bank and money was disappearing, and the bank's books started to look bad, well then they would go to Congress and they'd say, well, these banks are too big to fail. If they fail, well, the country will be in terrible, terrible condition. So it's our patriotic duty to keep these banks solvent. So every time the bank would get in trouble, the taxpayer would be called upon to pay the penalty and refund the money to the banks, which they lost because they were very careless in their loan systems, and they were playing this game of fractional reserve banking, where occasionally the people were silly enough to want their money back. And when they couldn't pay them all, anything over about 3 to 5%, why all of a sudden they realized that their war chest or their little money chest was empty. That's all they could do. And the banks would go belly up. People would lose their life savings. And so that was the whole hue and cry. They wanted to do something to control these big, bad bankers. And so that was the purpose of the Federal Reserve Act, was to control these big, bad bankers that were messing up everybody's financial lives. And so they had to do this in secret. They didn't want anybody to know that the bill, supposedly to control the big, bad bankers, was being drafted by the big, bad bankers themselves. Hence, they had to be secret. That's why Jekyll Island comes into the picture. And so that was what caught my attention. I thought, if you do something in secret and you really are serious about it, it's probably because you have something to hide. And I wanted to know, what was it they were trying to hide? And that was what really got me deeply into this. So I don't know. Now, let me flash forward on the basis of your question. That's how we started. It was a question of making horrendous amounts, obscene amounts of money out of nothing, creating loans, and they didn't have money to loan. They would just create it, and people said, oh, there's the money. I can see it, or it's on my checking account. They had no idea about how money comes into being as a bookkeeping entry. And so they were willing to pay interest on nothing because they thought it was somebody's real money that they'd worked hard to earn. They thought, well, they're loaning me their hard-earned money. They deserve an interest. But if they had known that they weren't loaning them anything at all, they were just creating numbers in a computer someplace, and that's what you were paying interest on, there would have been a rebellion. But of course, they had to keep it all in secret. So that's how it started. It was a money-making, plundering machine. But since that time, now let's move over through the World War I, World War II, bring it up to our present World War III that we're now in. It's a totally different kind of war, but definitely a world war. And we find out that the goal is far more than just making money. They've already got their hands on almost all of the money in the world anyway. The assets that these people at the very top own are embarrassingly high percentage of all the assets in the world. And it's all concentrated now in the hands of relatively few numbers of banks and investment houses that may not actually own all the investments totally, but they own the controlling interest, and so they have the voting rights to them, and that's almost as good. So anyway, that's where we are now, and along with that, this tremendous monopoly over the money supply in every nation of the world. Not the Federal Reserve has got its friends and relatives in every nation in the world. They all have their central banks, and they play the same game, and they work together. They're kind of an international fraternity, and they meet quite regularly at the Bank of International Settlements, which is in Basel, Switzerland. You don't hear much about that, but that's really the heartbeat of this whole international banking fraternity. And it has changed. Now we get to the question, how has it changed? It's no longer just money. In order to understand how it's changed, you have to be a little bit philosophical and think about the question, what is this thing called money and power? We're always talking about, what motivates people? Well, it's money and power. And it's true. That's true. Nobody really can challenge that. I suppose there are other motivations, but when you look at the world as a whole, that money and power seems to be the dominant one. There are people that have altruistic views. They have religious views. They have personal things that are very important to them. But on the global scale, it's money and power that moves nations and changes history. And so what is money and power? Well, it's not money and power, it's power. The reason money is in the equation is because money is power. So we're really talking about power when we say money and power. money is perhaps the most visible form and the most fluid and most useful form of power. If you've got a lot of money, you can hire a lot of people to perform services and provide goods for you. So money is merely a measurement of your access to the goods and services from other people. And if you have an endless amount of money, you have almost an endless number of people that you can buy. And especially if it doesn't cost you anything to create the money, you can just create it and buy somebody. And that's how the world has evolved. So that now it's no longer just money, because they've already got the money, the dominant part of it. It's power. It's raw power. That means they can now get rid of money. An interesting thought. And that is what is now going on. The transition that we're now going through is invisible to most people. But to me, it's very visible, and to a lot of other very astute researchers, it's visible. Money is being changed from what it was before throughout history. The main element that is being changed is that who owns it. It's always been, if you had money, you owned it. It was your money. You could do with it whatever you wanted to. Now, they might try and take it from you by stealing it from you, or from taxing you, or cheating you. That was sort of stealing it. But it's your money nevertheless, and you can put it in your mattress or in a coffee can, or you can do whatever you want to with it. And if you have acquired some money and you were frugal and you save a little bit of it, it gives you independence. You have your money to go back on. If you have no money, you can't go back on anything. If money is actually gone, as we know it, now you are dependent on something else to get goods and services that you need to survive. What would that be if it's not money? Well, the answer is it's called money, but it's not money in the traditional sense that you own it, it's yours. What's going on now is a transition, a very rapid one, I might add, from the old style of money that's yours to money in the bank that is theirs. And you are not entitled to it at all, except that to the extent that they will allow you to use their money. Now, this is a profound change because, well, you can't have any savings. It's impossible to have savings. And the money is not tangible. It's not paper. It's not coin. It's digital. So you can't hide it. You can't stick it in your pocket. You can't even sit on the curb and put out a tin cup and ask for people to donate to you because you're hungry, because they have nothing to put in the tin cup. Money is gone. It's all digital now. Now, it's true we have digital money today, but you can convert it into paper bills and coin and bullion and so forth and have purchasing power outside of the dollars or the yens or the whatever the national currencies are. But what the transition is now that they're going through, this is part of the Great Reset that Klaus Schwab is talking about, and others, is not going to be that at all. It's digital, yes, but it's not yours. You can't convert it into anything else because everything else is illegal. You are not allowed to use anything other than this central bank digital currencies. That's what they're talking about. Now these CBDCs, if you hear that phrase, slow down. This is what they're talking about. It kind of sounds like, oh, this is going to be good. It's going to be very convenient, and it's wonderful. Oh, won't you sign up? Yeah, we'll give you a couple of hundred of them free just for signing up, and you can buy anything in the world. You don't have to worry about converting one currency into another one. It's all one currency. It'll be wonderful, and people are going, hooray, hooray, at last. Now, if they can cause the economic system to collapse, so that the remnants of the old system, this is now coming to an end anyway because they've tweaked it so much it's going to fall apart. They know it's going to fall apart. So what we see now is they're deliberately trying to blow it up. They want it to crash. Previously, they wanted to keep it going as long as possible, to kick the can down the road so they can continue the plundering game that they've used over decades and centuries. But now they're deliberately trying to blow it up. They're creating money out of nothing at such a rate today that it's any child, any grade school kid, I think, who knew anything about how to add figures and subtract figures, could see that this system is not practical. It's got to blow up. And when I say blow up, I mean the purchasing power of the individual units got to plummet so far that it'll be essentially zero. And American dollars would be no different than Zimbabwe dollars and so forth. We've all seen pictures of people going to the store with a wheelbarrow full of Zimbabwe dollars to buy groceries for the week or the day. And even in my collection, I think I've got a couple of Zimbabwe bills, and it's trillions of dollars on one piece of paper. And actually, it's trillion. So the American dollar is going there. And of course, when it gets even close to that, it's totally useless and the economy will just completely fall apart. Now, this is part of the plan now because they're going for raw power, not monetary power. When the economy falls apart and it costs you $1 trillion to buy a loaf of bread or something like that, you can see you're going to get hungry pretty soon. And this is what they want, because now they'll come and say, well, we, the government, will now take care of you. We'll give you food coupons, or we'll give you digital currencies, just because we care about you. You just do what we do, what we tell you to do, and accept all of our rules and regulations, and don't say anything against us, as long as you are completely obedient and friendly and don't try and do anything nasty about our regime. Why, we'll make sure you can buy the bread and the milk and so forth. But if you step out of line, brother, we turn the switch, like they're doing now in China with the social credit scores. That is what they're after. Now, that is raw power. That's not money. You don't own that. You're allowed to use it. It's owned by the state or by the banks. In this case, in America, it'll be owned by the banks, and not even the state. The state will have to get its money from the banks, who give the banks even further control over the government. And nobody sees it except the people that care and have taken the time to understand how this mechanism works. So you ask, where are we now and where are we going? This is it. We're there now. And there's some talk about having to wrap this whole thing up by 2030. And all of a sudden they're talking about sooner dates than that. They're even talking about 2026. And now I saw something just the other day that they wanted to get a major portion of this plan in operation by the end of this year, 2024. So they're speeding it up. And I think the reason they're speeding it up is because people are waking up. And as long as we still have the remnants of a real money system where we have things in our hands and they're our money and people can accept them and it's legal to accept them, as long as that exists, we can break this thing. And so they're trying to, chop off all those avenues of escape as quickly as possible so that there will be no way for the average person to escape this kind of a prison. It's raw power, and money will have been transformed from money as we have known it, which is real money, into digital currencies, which are not money at all, but they're tokens that will be awarded to people for their obedience.
What an explanation. So let me just share back with you what, like, some of the key points I've taken from what you've said, because it's so important. And how I understand it is that, let's just say 400 years ago, the power was spread all across the world. You had kings, you had lords, you had people that owned treasure chests full of gold and silver all over the place. There wasn't a centralized power. So if a group of people wanted to create a system where they had all the power in the world, like the villain in every Bond movie, etc., they would have to first create a monetary system that would allow them to collect all of the money in the world, because that money is power. And let's just say that you're someone that, like, say, Donald Trump as an example, that has billions of dollars that can finance his own presidential campaign. That's power. If you can put $100 million towards a campaign, or say, let's just say you were worth, $1 billion, and you wanted to educate the whole world on alternative cancer treatments that won't kill you, you could do that. That's power. It would completely destroy a lot of their system. But of course, they don't let those things happen. And you see that as people get wealthier and wealthier, that system controls them more and more and more. And so that really like how you put it, that money is probably the rawest form of power, and the most basic indicator of power is the amount of money. So they've gotten to a point now where they've consolidated the vast majority of the world's money. And now that they've consolidated the vast majority of the world's money, it's this final stage for them where that money is already power, but they then convert that money, they get rid of the money, and they're just left with raw power. And so that's where we're at right now. So it's interesting because I've talked a lot about the BRICS nations and the de-dollarization. And I think that for a lot of people, they like to think that, oh, say Putin and Xi Jinping, they're going against the evil cabal that's in America. Whereas I think it's actually, there in a lot of ways, it's we look at left and right politics as being two wings of the same bird. In many ways, I look at the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc as two wings of the same bird, because if the people sitting on top of this, if they can use these BRICS nations to destroy the dollar and collapse that fiat system, it's helping accelerate their plan of getting rid of all currencies. Is that
Precisely, yes.
Is that what
Precisely.
you see happening?
That's very astute, yes. Anybody that really thinks that Mr. Putin and Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump really have any visions other than what they share in terms of money is mistaken, because it's internationalized. I mean, there are clues, of course, that are visible. When you see people like Putin and Klaus Schwab sitting there across the table talking to each other and complimenting each other on how wonderful they're running their countries or they're running their philosophies and so forth, you know that there's something afoot that's not being reported in the news. And when Trump travels around the world and meets with these people, and again, they're congenial and they're talking about the future and how wonderful it will be when the monetary system is cleaned up and so forth. They use words that sound good, but when you stop and slow down and say, what are they talking about? Oh, they're talking about exactly what I described a moment ago. It's international. And your analogy that you just mentioned, that the East and the West are really like two wings on the same bird, just like left and right is. And this is something that the average person does not see and really doesn't want to see. Is because as long as we think that we're on the side of right and they're on the side of wrong, well, we feel like there's a battle going on. There's a chance that we might win. But if you think that, oh my gosh, both sides are being directed from the same central source, and the whole purpose of the battle between them is not for one to win, but just to gradually move the whole system in one direction, and that's to the point where there will be, you can have two apparent sides, but they're not really opposed to each other. I think Orwell's novel, was it 1984, well, predicted that the world would be divided into certain groups that appeared to be at war with each other constantly. But the war was there not to defeat anyone, but just to keep the population controlled, thinking that they had enemies that they had to fight. And they couldn't complain about the sacrifices they were being asked to make, because after all, we're at war, And so that's the game that's played over and over again throughout recent history. And you'd think that we'd get wise to it. But I look at my own case. I went through school, went through the university, and maybe that's the reason I went to the university. And of course, they taught me just the opposite. They taught me about the advantages of collectivism and globalism and all that sort of thing. And I bought into it totally.
Looking at where this system is now, and you mentioned this acceleration, I think that's a really important point as well. When people, they see the plan was, Agenda 2030, now it's 2026, 2025, end of year 2024. It seems like, oh my gosh, they're getting more powerful, and their grip is getting tighter and tighter. But I see it as time is their friend. If they have more time, it's like the Chinese, Mao Zedong's, his 100-year marathon. He knew that in 100 years he could bring down America. that was how the Chinese looked at things. They looked at it in generations. So the fact, though, that time is no longer their friend and they're having to quicken and tighten as quickly as possible, to me, it shows that I agree with what you're saying, that they're concerned that they're losing their window to bring in their system. Because right now we still have independence. I can take $1,000 and go buy, you know, 500 rounds of 9mm ammo if I want to, which they don't want that, right? But I can do that. I can take $1,000 and go buy a bunch of silver and bury it in my backyard. They don't like that. So we still have independence for this moment. So the collapse of this system, which, as you've talked about, they're hastening. They want this now. They've extracted all the power out of the global financial system. They now want it to collapse. I know it's hard to make predictions because there's a lot of unknowns, but is that something you see happening? And do you think that we will experience in, say, the next 5 or 10 years or in our lifetimes, the collapse of the fiat currency, the dollar fiat currency, which is, in my understanding, would then become a domino effect for so many currencies around the world collapsing because so many countries they're holding U.S. treasuries, et cetera. I mean, do you think that we're on the verge of an event like that I think could, make the Great Depression look like just a bad year at the stock market?
Definitely, I think that's a good way of summarizing. We are on the threshold, and I think that it was bound to happen anyway because the system is so badly riddled, so badly stretched and damaged that it couldn't possibly. There's no way we can repay the national debt, for example. There's just no way. It's too large. So how many times the gross national product, and the gross national product is probably exaggerated. It can make us feel good. They twist those numbers a lot to control our attitudes, make us feel good about things. So no, it's bound to collapse anyway. I'm just amazed that it hasn't collapsed before now. So that's not the issue. Will it collapse? Because it will. But I think your analysis is correct. They have decided somewhere along the way, in the recent past perhaps, that, okay, this is going to collapse. Let's time it. Let's coordinate it with other things that we are trying to promote so that it doesn't cause too much trouble for us. We'll prepare for it. We'll even know how we're going to explain it to the people. We'll have what do they call them? These trial sessions, let's have an experiment. There's a name for that escaping me for the moment, but it's like a military exercise to prepare for something. Simulation. I'm trying to think of simulation. They always have simulations, and they're beginning to have simulations now of what to do when the banks close, or if there's a war, or all the things that they have on paper as possibilities for new crises to drive us into further fear, so that we stop talking like we're now talking. We have to talk about, are they going to bomb us now? Or when does the water get turned on? I'm dying of thirst. They want us struggling for life so that we stop thinking about constitutional rights and things like that. We only worry about, how am I going to live? That's what they want. Under those conditions, people will be grateful for this central bank digital currency, which will be offered to us. And we can get our water and our soup and the line and so forth. If we have these little cards or something tattooed under our hand, look, Griffin's he's got capability of withdrawing 250 units today, but he can only spend it on certain things. And if he does this, and this, he gets nothing today, and maybe nothing tomorrow either. And if he really is a bad boy, we lose him completely. He's not even in the system anymore. So he has to starve or beg for people to give him bread. That's what we're going into. And I know it sounds extreme. People say, this guy is a fruitcake. He's a real conspiracy theorist, he is. Well, I'm not a conspiracy. Don't mind being a conspiracy theorist, if that were the case. But this is conspiracy, not theory, but history. It's history. It's what we can prove has happened up until now. And we can look at what they're saying. They're bragging about what they're going to do. This is not me saying that they're going to do these things. They say that they're going to do these things. But they make it when they say it, they try and make it sound like it's going to be a good thing, but they're talking about the same thing. They're going to say we need government to control our lives. That's the trouble with history. They will say freedom is. We used to think it was a good idea, but freedom is a terrible idea. Look at the wars we've had. Look at the famines we've had. You know, all the things that they create. They'll say that's because these people had freedom. Now, it's the best thing for mankind. It's the greater good of the greater number for us to have total control over society. And you should be grateful that we are doing it. That's the argument. And a lot of people are buying into it.
And so
I feel so sorry to say that. But right now,
I agree.
too many people are buying into that.
I agree. And so for people that are watching this and trying to figure out what to do, and this isn't about financial advice. It's not about, if you invest in this stock, it's going to double in the next 3 years. And it's not about this. To me, it's no different than buying food, right? Like, having, because that's a good example. If I have $1,000 of my own money right now, I can go buy $1,000 worth of, survival food, and I can store it. And that means that if I need food, I have my own food store. But if that $1,000 disappears overnight because of their collapse of the system, and I can't buy that food, that now gives them power over me to say, like what you said, well, as long as you're saying what we want you to say and you're thinking what we want you to think, we'll keep giving you food. So in terms of, let's just say people that do have money right now, because we do have it in the system, we might have savings or, stuff, mattress full of $100 bills or whatever it is. What is the best way to plan and to avoid falling into this trap of losing everything when they flip that switch and then becoming really controlled by them and giving up all of our power? What are some things that people can do? And again, I want to frame this. This isn't about financial advice. This is about survival advice, because I think that the more of us can act in ways now that we can survive whatever's coming, we increase our chance of winning. But if they come out and the first wave of the war kills off, 2/3 of all of us who are trying to fight against them, that's not good.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are not good in their agenda, and that's one of them. Well, it's pretty simple, but there's an aspect to it that many people miss, I think. So let me explain what I mean by that. The usual advice is if you're going to become independent, or try to be as independent as possible in times of great collapse, economic and civil collapse, the obvious things are you've got to have food stored. Okay, any questions? You've got to eat. You've got to have a good water supply. And if you're living in the city and all your water comes out of a pipe, you better invest in a lot of big barrels of water, big ones, and so have you a lot of storage capacity. But even they get emptied out after a few months, and so it's a question of how far can you go and how much food can you store, how much water can you store, and how will you defend it when people are dying of thirst and hunger? They'll be coming around looking for you because they heard that you've got food and water. Now you've got to defend your life in order to have your food and your water. It's a very grim picture. So you can talk about these things and you can do these things. And I think I have done some of that. I have a little food put away. I have some water stored, just like for the reason I said. But I don't think for a minute that's going to get me a free get out of jail free card in this thing. It's not enough. Now let me just jump ahead. The only thing we must do those things. Get some gold and silver, especially negotiable coins, or there's a new system out called the gold backs, where there's real gold in a plastic envelope, and it looks like it's like a dollar bill or a $10 bill, but it's gold. And I'm looking at that very carefully. In fact, we might even start advocating that if I can see that there's real gold in there. And I've seen some videos of how they get the gold out of it. You put it in a crucible and heat it up, and all the plastic burns away, and then sure enough, there's some gold in the bottom. Now, I'm going to do that experiment myself, and if that is true, and it's something that the average person could do if they really wanted to, I would start adding that to the list of things that you might want to store. but you can't eat these things. So they start with things that you have to eat. And you have to defend yourself against mob violence and desperate people. So you have to have weapons, unfortunately. But if you don't, my old saying is that having guns is very dangerous. People get killed accidentally with guns. Little children get killed with guns. The only thing more dangerous than having guns is not having guns. that's the reality. So you have to face up to some of these realities. That's why the government wants everybody disarmed. They don't. They say it's because of bad people shooting in schools and things like that, or in supermarkets. No, they just don't want people like us to have guns to protect ourselves, so that our only means of protecting ourselves is to have the government protect us. And then who protects us from the government, which becomes the greatest predator of all. Anyway, so you can talk about things you should do: food, storage, water, weapons. Another thing is we always talk about find out who your friends are, form into little groups, make sure you've got assistance when you need help. Don't be so alone. You need family. You need the bigger family. You need the clan, the tribe, as we call it now, who will come to your aid if you need help. You need to have medical supplies and know how to treat basic infections and things like that. These are things you can do. Now, that's the first part. There are plenty of articles on the internet on this sort of thing. Everybody sort of knows instinctively anyway what to do in that area. But the other part that never gets talked about is these things won't guarantee your future in freedom. They're merely delaying tactics. They slow down the ultimate end of your freedom or your life. They may delay it a little bit. You can hide a little bit. You might survive another month or 2 or 3, but sooner or later, all your preparations will be exhausted or subverted in some way. And if the system is allowed to go the way we're talking about, none of that will make any difference. So this is reality. If that is true, then when we talk about how we should act now to prepare or to survive, we need to add one more word, not just to prepare or survive, but to win. To win. That means we have to be proactive, not defensive. We have to have our own plans, we have to recover the system. We have to engage these forces that we're talking about. We must depose them. Whatever it takes, if we have to win, otherwise our freedom and our lives are gone. So this is a life and death struggle, and we shouldn't just be talking about how do you survive. I think we should talk about how do you survive while you prepare to win. And if that element is added to it, now count me in, I'm all for it. And so we start with educational programs where people have to be informed. I can assure you most people in America or the world know nothing about what we are talking here today, about money and banking, they know nothing about that. That means they're helpless. They cannot defend themselves. They'll fall for all of the lies and deceptions that they can think of. They'll just fall for them all. And so we have to do an educational campaign, which is already underway, and underway quite well, I might add. But we have to do more than that. We have to take this growing group of awareness, these people who are now aware, and get them talking to each other and getting organized and not hiding in their homes and saying, I don't want to go out. I don't want to speak up because it's controversial. They've got to get out there and start shouting from the rooftops our message and get organized so that we can depose these people politically and non-violently. We don't want any blood in the streets. We don't want revolution. And they don't either, by the way. Real revolution. They'd like to have revolts here and there that they can easily squash with a couple of squads of police with their armored, their shields and all that stuff, and batons, and the drones that come in. They got plenty of weapons for that sort of thing, but they can't overcome the 99-to-1 ratio of the human race of these people at the top and the bottom. So we need to get about 15% of the population mobilized so that they represent political power, Now we start replacing these people in positions of authority, and we start reversing some of these laws and these trends. We do it legally because we still have the power to do that. If we wait much longer, we may not have that power. So that's where the urgency is. The urgency is not so much how much gold and silver you have and how much food you have, but the urgency is how organized are you, and are we going to get on board with taking back control of our political system? And for that reason, in fact, I wasn't thinking about this, but it leads up to something very important that I would like to close with on this whole topic. And that is the reason that we created something called Red Pill University. Red Pill University is a sort of it's a cyber organization. So by itself, it can't do the job, but it brings people together and provides the information that we need. Not just educational organizations. These are activist groups. These are people who support candidates. These are people who go visit the sheriff and make sure he's informed and to make sure he's the right one. And if we need candidates, these are people who will go find candidates for public office. We're not interested in waiting around until election time and say, well, let's see who's running for office. Who should I vote for? No, the game is over by that time because our opposition usually has presented both sides. And we have your choice between the left and the right wing, as you said before. No, we have to field our own candidates. Mostly the people that we will put up as candidates are people who don't want to be in public office. You know, that's a pretty good litmus paper test. People that want to be in office, just to be in office, are usually, it's because of some self-motive that they intend to benefit themselves from it. What we want is people who are leading successful, normal lives and don't want to get involved in all this dirty business of politics. We have to get involved in this dirty business of politics. Otherwise, we'll forever be ruled by those who do get involved in dirty politics. So we're building campuses now. And we have an organization behind it all called Freedom Force International. And it gets complicated, I know, all these levels of organization, but they're for different reasons and different levels of the population with different levels of awareness, let's say. At the very top, at the red pill, above the red pill, at the Freedom Force International level, these are people who are dedicated warriors. They're guardians of the flame, so to speak. What's the flame? I'm going to come to an end on this. What's the flame, the guardian? It's an idea. It's an ideology. It holds us all together. It's our common bond. One of the problems that the forces of freedom has had in not winning, we've been losing. Freedom has been losing for a long, long time. One of the problems or the reasons is that those of us on the side of freedom have never been able to say what it is we believed in, other than the word freedom. What does that mean? Freedom to rule over others? You know, if you're a lawyer, you can take a word like freedom and mess it really up. So we need more than just this idea. We want to be free, or more than holding up the Constitution. Says, look, we support the Constitution. And then you ask them, well, what's in the Constitution? Well, it's the Constitution, you know. Well, what about the Constitution? China has a Constitution too. How is ours different from them? Oh, I don't know. It's ours. No, that's not good enough. That's not good. We have to know what it is that is necessary for freedom to exist. What are the pros and the cons and the danger points? And one of the danger points, of course, is that should we win in this struggle, we might be corrupted by power and become just as bad as the people we oppose. That's the story of history. So history is complete with these examples of tyrannies that have been overthrown by the cost of great blood and treasure. And yet they've been replaced by new tyrannies that are just as bad, if not worse, than the old. It's because when people fought against tyranny, all they knew was that this is tyrannical and we don't like it. So if we just get rid of the tyrant, we win. No. If we get rid of the tyrant and we're led by another tyrant in getting rid of the first tyrant, we haven't gained anything. And that's what we have to be on guard against. So what is the thing we have to look for? What is this thing, tyranny, called? I mean, what is it? We know what it's called, but what's it built on? What are the elements of it? And so we have this thing called the creed of freedom. And that's what everybody signs in on. And we find exactly as we hoped we would find, is that this creative freedom is truly universal. I don't care what culture, what nation people live in. I don't care whether they're rich or poor, whether they're male or female. I don't care what their lifestyle is. I don't care about anything of that. If they read the Creed of Freedom, I find that by most, I mean 90% of people of goodwill toward their fellow man will say, yeah, that's true. That's true. This is what binds us together. And it's this, most of it is dealt with the differences between individualism versus collectivism. That's the core of our battle today, and very few people talk about it. They talk about, well, Republicans versus Democrats, or left wing versus right wing, or they talk about communism versus fascism, or socialism versus capitalism. They don't understand that underneath all of those layers of confusing words that can be redefined in any way you wish almost, underneath all of that, there's a basic ideological conflict around the world, and it's individualism versus collectivism. And all of the rest are merely variants of those words. So we're building a movement based on an understanding of what it takes not only to overthrow a tyranny, but to keep it overthrown, so that we don't accidentally, out of ignorance, create another one just like it. So all of that, I'm going to say, focuses down now to these campuses of Red Pill University, because that creative freedom is what drives these people. And we found already through experience, and we're just beginning to build them now, but already I've tested it. If you give me, let me tell you a different way of approaching it. I was involved in creating one of these things, and we started with 3 people over coffee. We decided, okay, this one, how are we going to do that? Well, let's start by meeting twice a week, at least twice a week, and we're going to have coffee or lunch or dinner or whatever, or just get together. And we're not going to leave our conversations unless we've all agreed to do something tangible to make this happen. And within about 5 weeks, we had attracted, I'm going to say, 20 people. And at the end of 6 months, or 7 months, we had built a little army. I don't know what the number is. We don't even know who they were. But people who volunteered to distribute our pamphlets and to call in on the radio, talk shows, express opinions. It was organized. And we defeated a very strong opposition that was sponsored by the big corporations. They were trying to sell the idea that we needed a water district. And the reason they wanted it is because they wanted to put meters on everybody's wells and say, we have a water shortage. And they wanted to tax everybody on the water. And then they wanted to steal it. And they wanted a water commission to do that. And there was no water commission. The rules and regulations relating to the water supply were being handled pretty well by the County Board of Supervisors. But they wanted their own water board, which they could control. They already had their people in position for it. But nobody knew that they had people in position for it. They talked about water independence. We want to be free from Sacramento, which was the center of California's state government. And they had a slogan. Was there a slogan? Well, it had to do with water independence. And I'm surprised I can't think of the word, but they had a very good word for it, like freedom in water or something like that. And people thought, yeah, they didn't want Sacramento to tell them how to run their water, so they were all for a local water board. Local control, that was their phrase. Local control. And of course, it was local control, right? But it was controlled by the corporations instead of by the board of supervisors. Now, I'm suspicious of boards of supervisors too, by the way. You give anybody the power to do something like that, and you better watch them pretty carefully, because they might sell that influence for some money. Anyway, so their motto was local control, which tricked everybody into thinking that they really were interested in local control, which they weren't. So we beat them at the polls, and it was about a 70% victory. And our total budget was, I think, advertising and everything was less than $5,000. And we had estimated they had spent almost $1 million on their propaganda program. But we beat it, starting with 3 people. It can be done. You don't need large numbers, but you need people who are motivated and are all on the same track. They understand what collectivism is and what individualism is. And I'm going to just say we've already tested it, and the formula works. And if I'm going to make an offer right now, I want everybody to know more about collectivism versus individualism. And I'm working on another book. I've been working on it much too long, but it's mainly dealing with that topic. And I thought, at the rate I'm going, I might never get this book done. But what I could do is take everything I've written so far on the topic, including the Creed of Freedom that I mentioned a moment ago, and put it into a document, say a 50-page document. And I can put it up on the internet, and people can download it for free if they're interested in this. They should be interested in this, because without this understanding, we cannot win. That's the common ideology in every issue that you can think of. So I'm going to make this offer right now. If anybody listening wants that free download of this book called The Chasm, Individualism versus Collectivism, you can just go to the internet and type in chasm, CHASM, realityzone.com. So that's chasm.realityzone.com. And you can download this. There, you're way ahead of me. Wow. Can you travel around with me? And yeah, there it is. There's a picture of the cover of it. And that huge chasm there on the front is just a pretty good description of the difference between individualism and collectivism. There's no crossing that chasm. You've got to be on one side or the other.
Well, I'll make sure that all these links are in the description for people that are watching. I encourage everyone that does watch to share this content, because I think it was an important discussion that ended with solutions, which is what I always like to do. Mr. Griffin, I really, truly appreciate not just the time you've given us today, but just everything that you're doing. You are an exemplar. You're just an example of what all of us should be doing. And your work has reached millions, if not billions of people. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for the honor of having you on the show today.
Well, thank you for that. And the encouraging thing about what you just said is that there are a lot of people doing what I'm doing. Our job now is not so much to find more people, it's to get the people who are already working together. They think they're alone. That's where Red Pill University and Red Pill Expo come in. Getting these people splintered out there together so they realize, oh my gosh, we are definitely in the majority. And that's pretty important. So thank you for that. And I just want to offer my appreciation to you, because you're part of the clan we're talking about. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Take care and God bless.